To start this episode, how about a little riddle? What's something that all college students eat, costs less than the lint in your pocket, and hails from the land of the rising sun? That's right, ramen. Today, this dish is going to be the star of the show. But it's not going to be your sad college dorm room instant ramen, nah. Nah, today we're making some real deal ramen.
Coming through now. Coming through. Shake it like it's heat. Hold the drive. Coming through now. Coming through now. Coming through. Watch where you go.
Before we dive right into the recipe, let's learn some more about ramen as a whole. That's right, I've baited you with delicious food pictures right into my education trap. But seriously, the history of ramen is pretty interesting. The first thing close to ramen came into existence in early 20th century Japan. Here, some Chinese immigrants living in Tokyo and working as cooks began to take noodles and add more meat to them than was normal in Japan during this time. This resulted in a primitive version of ramen, which then rooted itself as a popular dish in Japan, blossoming into the dish we know today. But what about instant ramen? See, instant ramen was made in 1958 by a Japanese man named Momofuku Ando. He got the idea from a walk he took the day after Japan surrendered to the Allies at the end of World War II. He saw people in war-weathered Osaka lined up in the midst of post-war wreckage outside of a ramen stall, waiting for some food. He thought that it was incredible that people would go to such lengths for a bowl of ramen, and he kept this memory stored in his head. Following the war, Ando worked as a bank president. During this time, he had developed the opinion that hunger was the most critical issue facing post-war Japan, and with good reason. Food shortages were commonplace across Japan in the post-war period. In 1957, Ando's bank failed, and he decided to help end Japan's food shortage. His creation? Instant ramen. This creation would explode in popularity in Japan, actually end up helping the Japanese food shortage, and make its way to the global market to be enjoyed by all. The ramen we're going to make today is shoyu ramen. This ramen is characterized by its use of soy sauce and hails straight from Tokyo. So, without any further ado, let's dive right in. To start off, you're going to need to find 2 pounds of pork belly, or pork butt, and 6 pounds of pork neck bones. We had the Big B himself butcher some pigs for us, but since 99% of people don't have pigs living in their backyard, just buy some at your local grocer of choice. Get a pot big enough to fit your pork neck bones in, fill it with cold water and add the bones, then let it sit for an hour. After the hour, get another pot big enough to fit the pork bones in, bring it to a boil, then swap your pork bones over to it. To get rid of weird bone bits and dried blood, you're going to blanch the pork for around 5 to 8 minutes. And when you're done, drain the pot and rinse the pork bones individually with cold water. In our broth, a few key vegetables are going to be dropped in. Namely, 2 ounces of ginger, 2 bulbs of garlic, a large leek, and 1.5 ounces of kombu, which is just dried seaweed. Roughly cut your ginger, half your garlic, half your leek, and rinse it well. And open your kombu package. You don't really need to do much with prepackaged dried seaweed now, do you? In a large pot, add in the aforementioned veggies along with 1.5 tablespoons of chicken stock powder and 24 cups of water. Turn on high heat and bring it all to a boil. Boil this broth for 15 minutes. And make sure you skim off any gunk that comes to the surface during this boil. Now, cover the pot, drop the heat to a medium, and simmer this for 3 hours. After these 3 hours where your kitchen begins to smell like heaven, it's time to start to cook the pork. Drop the pork into the broth, simmering for an hour and 20 minutes for one large 2-pound piece, or 45 minutes if you've chosen to break your 2 pounds into 2 smaller pieces. And while this meat cooks, it's tare time. Tare is essentially a flavor booster added to the ramen broth. Without it, your taste buds are going to feel disappointed when you first dig in, so let's avoid that, shall we? Chop up 1 clove of garlic and slice up some ginger, an amount to your liking. Then in a pot, pour in 1.5 cups of soy sauce, 3/4 cups mirin, 3/4 cups sake, then add the veggies. Bring this pot to a boil over high heat for 5 to 7 minutes. And as soon as it's done, you can just take it off and set it aside to let cool. When the pork is done, cut the heat to the broth and fish out the pork from the broth pot. Drizzle 4 tablespoons of your tare over it, then put it in a container and drop it in the fridge till you're ready to use. Now, back to the broth. You're going to want to strain it into some container and discard the vegetables. But you can keep the pork bones and pork bone meat if you want. At this point, everything we have made can be stored for about a week in the fridge, if you're not making ramen right now. You can even freeze the broth to make it last a month if you're crazy enough to wait that long. But since this kitchen smells way too good to wait a month, we're gonna move on. And so, remove the pork from the fridge and slice it into thin slices. Finally, chop up some green onions. How much you chop is completely dependent on how much green onion you want per ramen bowl. We suggest 2 green onions per bowl. For however many bowls of ramen you're making, you're gonna want to soft boil an egg. Simply boil a pot of water, gently drop in your eggs, and when the water begins to boil again, drop the heat and simmer the eggs for 3 to 4 minutes. When they're done simmering, take the eggs out and drop them straight into an ice bath. You're going to want to leave them in there until you can handle them directly, which usually takes around 5 minutes. Then, peel the eggs and boom, you're done. Next, bring a pot of water to a boil and use it to blanch some bean sprouts. Again, however many bean sprouts you blanch is completely dependent on how many you want to put in per ramen bowl. We recommend you blanch 3 ounces per bowl. Whatever you go with, blanch the sprouts for 2 minutes, and then set aside, making sure you drain the container you keep them in. Now, let's talk noodles. Honestly, we didn't get fancy with noodles. We used instant ramen noodles and used like 3 or 4, and then per bowl, we grabbed the amount of noodles that seemed good enough and then worked from there. Of course, that was us just guessing, so if you understandably don't want to go down this route, use 5 ounces of fresh ramen noodles or 3 ounces of the dried. And then cook them using the boiling bean blanched water according to the directions on their packaging. Now, we have all of our flavor weapons. Let's put them together. Pour a 1/4 cup of tare into a bowl with a 1/4 cup of your homemade ramen broth. You can add more tare if desired for more salty ramen. Add your noodles to the bowl, stir them so they get coated in all the beautiful broth tare mixture. Then, add in your pork slices. 4 ounces is a good standard amount, but who am I to tell you how much of this delicious pork to put in your ramen bowl? Add in literally as much as you want, because I don't think it's possible to add in too much of this amazing pork. Add in your chopped green onions, your bean sprouts, and drop in 1 soft-boiled egg. Cut it in half if you want to be fancy, and watch that egg yolk run. For an optional final step, grate in 1 clove of garlic directly into the bowl. And then boom, shoyu ramen.